What up, guys? Adrian from YouMotorcycle. Friday, May 24th marked the final day, that's the closure, end of production at the Kansas City, Missouri Harley-Davidson plant. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this story with you guys is because there's a little bit of everything in here. There's a cool backstory to just how in demand Harley was at the time that they built this plant, the future of bikes that were being produced there, bikes that were made in the past, bikes that are still being made right now, and what's going to happen with those bikes. And then there's also, of course, the people who work there, and just overall where the future of Harley-Davidson is going. There's a whole political part of it too. So if you guys want to check out that story, that's what I'll be sharing with you right after this. So let's start with the backstory in terms of how did this plant even come to be. A modern comparison would be thinking about almost a little bit like Amazon. When Amazon was going to be building their HQ2, they had cities from all over, from Toronto to New York, all over West Coast, that were trying to be the home of that second headquarters. Well, when Harley in the mid-90s said that they were going to be building a new 400 square foot plant, you had 30 communities from all over America that were offering tens of millions of dollars in state tax abatements in order to get Harley to bring their business to those communities. And here's the crazy thing, only 22 years later, this factory is being shut down. Now, the factory itself cost Harley $85 million to build, and unfortunately with this, about 800 employees are going to be losing their jobs there, which really sucks because that's through no fault of their own. So as a Harley rider, the first question that I asked myself was, okay, where are all these bikes that they're making there going to go? Essentially, Harley's plan is to take the production from Kansas City factory and move it to their York, Pennsylvania plant. In order to do this, Harley is going to be investing $150 million into their York, Pennsylvania plant. The expanded York plant is going to take over production of the Street, Dyna, and Sportster families of Harley-Davidsons. Now, there was one other family of Harley that was being made in Kansas City, and that stopped 2 years ago, and I'm talking, of course, about this bike right behind me, the Harley-Davidson VRod. In my opinion, the first generation VRod, this one right here, was the perfect motorcycle for today, but it came out 20 years too soon. The first gen VRod, especially this Night Rod over here, had mid controls and had a nice 180 tire, which made it super nimble, easy to handle. You had the performance in 1100cc bike that still outrivals and beats basically any bike that Harley makes today. And that thing came out in the early 2000s. See, back then, Harley riders weren't looking for that kind of bike. And non-Harley riders weren't looking to buy that kind of bike from Harley. So it just wasn't a good fit. And by the time the late 2010s came up, the VRod had just gotten so bloated and heavy and unnecessary that it didn't have that same sleekness that riders are looking for today. So by the time the riders came, the VRod was gone. And that's a real shame because the VRod produced in Kansas City, it was one of the greatest motorcycles that Harley ever made, and by far the most future-forward one. And it's too bad that they couldn't bring that with them. But enough of that aside on the VRod. What we really got to focus on here is why did the factory close, and what's going to happen to these people who were working there? Harley-Davidson blamed the closure specifically on President Trump's tariffs hurting their sales abroad. And I know what you're thinking. It's easy to blame it all on politics, but there's actual proof here, in a sense. So let's think about what's happening out there. Every Harley-Davidson sold in Europe would be subject to a new tariff as part of this sort of trade war that they had going on. And that tariff made Harley-Davidson's $2,000 more expensive for the exact same motorcycle. And as you can imagine, this $2,000 increase really hurt their sales abroad. Now, unfortunately for US workers, Harley can get around these tariffs by actually producing the motorcycles overseas. If Harley were to make that exact same $10,000 or $20,000 motorcycle in Europe, then they wouldn't be subject to that $2,000 increase anymore. And companies have been moving production all over the place, especially to Asia and Europe, forever. It's not just American companies building abroad, it's even Asian companies that are building in Europe. Think back to Europe in the mid-2000s. The single highest selling street bike was not a European bike. It wasn't a Triumph, it wasn't a Ducati. The hottest selling bike in Europe was the Honda Hornet. And while it was a Japanese bike, it was very much European designed and even made in Europe, made in Italy, so as to get around tariffs. So motorcycle companies have been doing this all the time. It's not just the Americas that do it. Now, this is a really weird and tricky situation for Harley. Their own domestic president of the United States is really hurting their sales internationally. And on the other hand, they're supposed to be this rah-rah American company. So what do? Well, they're building more facilities all over the place in Thailand, in Malaysia, but the idea is that factories built in Asia or in Europe would be building motorcycles for the Asian or European markets, but any motorcycles being sold in America would be still made in America. That just means that while we used to have American workers who were making Harleys that were going to be sold all over the world, now we're going to have foreign workers making Harleys for the rest of the world. It's sort of created this divide between a lot of former Harley employees and the company, and a lot of Harley riders and just Americans in the company who are just wondering what the hell's going on. And the reality is, none of us really know what's going to happen. Another thing we don't know is what's going to happen to the Kansas City plant. It sits on a 314-acre lot, which is now for sale, plant and all equipment included, for just $26 million. Now, if you remember correctly, Harley paid $85 million about 20-some years ago to make it. Now you can buy the whole thing for $26 million. That's not a bad deal, especially considering it includes $30 million worth of special paint equipment alone. That was not part of that original $85 million cost. Not to mention, you'd have a plant and all of this space in a town where about 600 plus machinists and specialized workers just became available for new jobs. If you're doing anything in the automotive or motorcycle segment, or if you're a rich billionaire who wants to bring back the VRod, give me a shout and let's make this happen. There's a hell of an opportunity in that property for the right investor. But now we got to talk about the most important part of all this, and that is the people who were working at the plant, and that's where things get kind of really sour in this whole story. Now, there was talks about the plant closing for over a year, and in January, Harley made it explicitly clear and official. So the plant workers did have a few months to try and prepare for themselves, but obviously when all of a sudden you find out you're not going to have work anymore, that's rough. There's no way around it. That sucks. Apparently, Harley's been doing a lot to try and help these employees out. They've been doing stuff like job fairs with about 100 different local employers. They've been doing training sessions, seminars, workshops, whatever you want to call it, to try and get their employees to learn or further develop skills that will make them more employable. So it seems like on their end, Harley's been doing a good job of trying to help these people out, which is great. So while it seems all good and like the employees were getting support and whatnot, there's actually this kind of grimy part to the story, which is that a lot of the former employees were reporting all kinds of harassment and racism. And I'm talking about minority employees at the facilities who were seeing stuff like swastikas being drawn all over the place, nooses being left all over the place, stuff that was meant to sort of intimidate and harass. Now, the motor company says that they've addressed any and all issues that have been reported to them. However, employees are reporting that things weren't as good as it seems. A lot of the people who were going on record about the issues of harassment and discrimination that they were facing were saying that as the timeline grew closer and closer to the plant closing down, that the harassment that they faced was getting worse and worse. And, I mean, it's a really shitty situation for everybody, but no matter what, that's not cool, Kansas City. I know you know better than that. So in conclusion, the Kansas City plant seems like it was closed down as part of Harley's sort of trimming the fat and focusing on the key areas of opportunity that's going to make them fiscally more successful. And unfortunately, that comes at the cost of the 800 employees who had to be let go, and only 450 new jobs being created elsewhere in a totally different part of the country. And that's really unfortunate. That really sucks. It seems like Harley right now today is operating in this kind of, they're working very differently than they used to be. They're sort of operating in this evolve or die mode, and as a result, they're doing a lot of really dramatic changes to try and stay alive and stay competitive and stay relevant in an ever-evolving, fast-paced motorcycle market. And obviously, you want the motor company to succeed, but when it comes at a cost like this, it sucks. And what the future holds next for Harley, for motorcycling, I mean, that's anyone's guess. But for now, it won't be happening in Kansas City. That plant is closed down and up for sale, and if you have a spare $26 million, you should buy it. And now I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comments, is Harley going to make it through the next few years? Are they going to turn their fortune around? Or will we need to see some kind of new election getting rid of Trump before things can really get better because American bikes will be able to sell internationally again? Are they just shit out of luck and it's too little too late? Or is this one of many drastic changes that Harley needs to make in order to be successful? Let me know in the comments. Love you guys. Peace.